A simple woman erased from the guest list. Then her billionaire husband made them regret it. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly as security denied her entry to Manhattan's most exclusive corporate gala. She doesn't belong here, the organizer sneered. But when her husband arrived, everything changed. They had no idea who they'd just humiliated. The golden lights of the Meridian Tower's 42nd floor cast an elegant glow across Manhattan's skyline. Tonight, the prestigious venue hosted the annual Tech Innovation Gala, where industry titans gathered to network, celebrate achievements, and close million-dollar deals. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, their light dancing across polished marble floors that reflected the designer gowns and tailored suits of New York's elite. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her simple beige dress as she stepped out of the taxi, smoothing the modest fabric with nervous fingers. At 38, she carried herself with quiet grace, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that highlighted her natural beauty. Unlike the other women emerging from luxury vehicles in their glittering gowns and diamond jewelry, Sarah's only accessories were small pearl earrings, a wedding gift from her husband Michael. She'd chosen this understated outfit deliberately. Despite her husband's enormous success, Sarah had never felt comfortable flaunting wealth. She preferred to let her actions speak louder than designer labels, a philosophy that had served her well in her volunteer work with local charities. Tonight, however, as she watched other guests sweep past her in their obvious displays of affluence, she wondered if, perhaps, she should have dressed more formally. The invitation in her small clutch purse bore her name in elegant script: Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, Guest of Honor. Michael had surprised her with it 3 weeks ago, explaining that his latest venture capital firm was being recognized at the gala. He'd been traveling extensively for business lately, closing deals across 3 continents, and tonight would be their first opportunity in months to attend such an event together. "You deserve to be celebrated too," he'd told her over breakfast that morning before catching his flight to Chicago. "Your foundation work has impacted more lives than half the people who will be at that gala. I'll meet you there straight from the airport." Sarah approached the gleaming entrance where uniformed attendants checked invitations with military precision. The red carpet beneath her modest heels felt surreal, like she was walking through someone else's life. Around her, conversations flowed in multiple languages as international business leaders discussed stock options, mergers, and market projections with the casual ease of people for whom millions were merely numbers on spreadsheets. A distinguished gentleman in his 60s, sporting a perfectly groomed silver beard and a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, nodded politely as he passed. His companion, a woman draped in silk and sapphires, barely glanced in Sarah's direction before dismissing her entirely. Sarah had grown accustomed to such reactions over the years. In her simple clothing and unpretentious manner, she often blended into the background at Michael's business functions, and she preferred it that way. The evening air carried the scent of expensive perfumes and the underlying tension of high-stakes networking. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah could see the glittering cityscape stretching endlessly in all directions, a testament to human ambition and achievement. Somewhere in that maze of lights and dreams, deals were being struck that would reshape industries and change lives. She checked her phone quickly. No message from Michael yet. His flight from Chicago had been delayed, but he'd assured her he would arrive before the keynote presentations began. For now, she would represent them both, something that still felt strange after 8 years of marriage. When they'd met, Michael had been successful, but not yet the industry giant he'd become. Back then, their life had been simpler, more intimate. Success had brought opportunities, but also complications she was still learning to navigate. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward toward the registration desk, her invitation ready. The night was young, and she had no idea that the next few minutes would test everything she'd learned about grace under pressure. The registration desk gleamed under spotlights, staffed by 3 impeccably dressed young women with tablets and guest lists. Sarah approached the middle station, where a brunette in her early 30s wearing a sharp black suit looked up with the practiced smile of someone paid to be pleasant. "Good evening," Sarah said warmly, extending her invitation. "Sarah Mitchell." The woman's manicured fingers flew across her tablet screen, her smile faltering slightly as she scrolled through the digital guest list. She scrolled again, more slowly this time, her brow furrowing with each passing second. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see your name on tonight's list. the woman said, her tone shifting from welcoming to cautiously apologetic. Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Could you check again, please? Sarah Mitchell, my husband Michael arranged for my invitation. He's being honored tonight." The registration clerk repeated her search, this time checking alternate spellings and cross-referencing with the VIP list. Behind Sarah, other guests continued to flow smoothly through the adjacent stations, their laughter and conversations creating a backdrop of exclusivity that suddenly felt very distant. "Ma'am, I've checked every variation, but there's no Sarah Mitchell registered for this evening's event." The woman's voice carried the rehearsed authority of someone who dealt with party crashers and social climbers on a regular basis. Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks as she became aware of the curious glances from nearby guests. A couple in matching designer outfits exchanged whispers while openly staring, their expressions a mixture of amusement and secondhand embarrassment. "There must be some mistake," Sarah insisted, maintaining her composure despite the growing attention. "I have the physical invitation right here. My husband's firm is one of tonight's honorees." The clerk examined the invitation with the skeptical eye of an expert, turning it over and holding it up to the light as if checking for forgery. "The invitation appears authentic, but without your name on our list, I cannot grant you entry. Security protocols are very strict for an event of this caliber." "Could you call your supervisor?" Sarah asked, her voice remaining steady despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. "I'm sure this can be resolved quickly." "Victoria Henderson is our event coordinator," the clerk replied, already reaching for her radio. "She'll be able to help clarify the situation." Within moments, a woman in her early 40s approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to solving problems efficiently. Victoria Henderson wore a midnight blue dress that cost more than most people's rent, her dark hair swept into a sophisticated updo that framed sharp, calculating eyes. She carried herself with the unmistakable air of someone who considered herself indispensable to Manhattan's social machinery. "What seems to be the issue here?" Victoria asked, her gaze sweeping over Sarah's modest appearance with barely concealed judgment. "This woman claims to be invited, but she's not on our guest list," the clerk explained, handing over Sarah's invitation. Victoria examined the invitation with theatrical thoroughness, her expression growing more skeptical with each detail she scrutinized. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it?" she said, pronouncing the name as if it tasted unpleasant. "I personally oversee the guest list for this event. Every name is carefully vetted and approved. I can assure you that no Sarah Mitchell appears anywhere in our records." "My husband arranged my invitation," Sarah repeated, her patience beginning to wear thin. "Michael Mitchell of Mitchell Ventures." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. "I'm familiar with Michael Mitchell naturally. However, his attendance tonight is strictly business-related. This event is designed for industry professionals and their appropriate companions." She emphasized the word appropriate with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The implication hung in the air like a slap. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Victoria continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "This invitation appears to be irregular. Perhaps you obtained it through unofficial channels?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Around them, the registration area had grown quieter as more guests paused to observe the unfolding drama. She could hear fragments of whispered conversations. "Who does she think she is?" And "Security should handle this." "Are you suggesting I forged this invitation?" Sarah asked, her voice barely controlled. Victoria shrugged with practiced indifference. "I'm simply stating that our security protocols exist for a reason. Manhattan's premier business events attract all sorts of aspirational individuals. We've learned to be cautious." A security guard materialized beside Victoria, as if summoned by telepathy. He was a large man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years dealing with uncomfortable situations. His presence wasn't overtly threatening, but the message was clear. "Ma'am," he said in a voice that managed to be both respectful and firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," Sarah replied, her composure finally cracking. "I belong here. My husband—" "Your husband," Victoria interrupted, "is apparently too busy with important business matters to ensure his companion has proper documentation." She pronounced companion with just enough emphasis to make her meaning clear. The gathered crowd now included several recognizable faces from business magazines and financial news programs. A woman in an emerald dress whispered something to her escort that made him chuckle. Another couple shook their heads sympathetically, as if watching someone embarrass themselves at their first country club dinner. "Look," Victoria said, adopting a tone of false kindness. "I understand your disappointment. Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of your husband's invitation. These industry events are quite exclusive. Not everyone is equipped to navigate this level of professional networking." Sarah opened her mouth to respond when a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Excuse me, what exactly is going on here?" Every head turned toward the elevator bank, where a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit was striding across the marble floor with purposeful determination. Michael Mitchell's presence commanded immediate attention, not through volume or theatrics, but through the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His dark hair was slightly tousled from travel, and his expression carried the focused intensity of someone who just witnessed something that required his immediate intervention. Victoria's confident demeanor flickered for just a moment before she recovered her professional smile. "Mr. Mitchell!" Victoria exclaimed, her voice suddenly bright with relief. "How wonderful that you've arrived. We were just explaining to this young woman that there seems to be some confusion about her invitation." Michael's eyes moved from Victoria to the security guard, then to the cluster of onlookers, before finally settling on Sarah. In that moment, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something much more dangerous. "This young woman," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built billion-dollar empires, "is my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror in the span of 3 seconds. The security guard took an instinctive step backward. Several guests in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances as they realized they'd been watching someone's wife being humiliated. "Your wife?" Victoria stammered, her professional composure crumbling like a house of cards. "Sarah Mitchell," Michael continued, moving to stand beside his wife. "The woman whose name should have been at the very top of your VIP list, considering I specifically requested it when I confirmed my attendance 3 weeks ago." Victoria's tablet trembled in her hands as she frantically scrolled through her records. "Mr. Mitchell, I assure you there must be some technical error. Our systems are usually flawless." "Are they?" Michael interrupted, his tone remaining conversational but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your system failed spectacularly. My wife was denied entry, questioned about the authenticity of her invitation, and subjected to implications that she somehow didn't belong here." The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the magnetic pull of unfolding drama. Among the observers were several prominent figures from the tech industry, venture capital firms, and financial institutions, people whose opinions could make or break careers in Manhattan's business circles. "Mr. Mitchell," Victoria said, attempting to regain control of the situation, "I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Oh, I think we're well beyond private discussions," Michael replied, his voice carrying clearly across the marble atrium. "You see, I've been traveling for business, closing a rather significant acquisition. But even from Chicago, I received some interesting phone calls this afternoon." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone, the screen already illuminated with what appeared to be an email thread. "It seems my assistant received a call from your office yesterday, requesting that certain names be removed from tonight's guest list. Names that were deemed, how did they put it, inconsistent with the event's professional standards." Victoria's face had gone completely pale. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Victoria began, but Michael held up a hand that commanded immediate silence. "I'm not implying anything," he said, his voice remaining dangerously calm. "I'm stating facts. You deliberately removed my wife's name from the guest list because you decided she didn't fit your narrow definition of who belongs at a business event." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. These people attended hundreds of corporate events, but they had never seen someone challenge the established social order so directly and publicly. Michael scrolled through his phone with deliberate slowness, Here's an interesting email from your assistant to mine, sent yesterday at 2:47 p.m. Please advise Mr. Mitchell that plus ones should reflect the professional caliber of the event. Some adjustments to the guest list may be necessary to maintain our standards. A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled crowd. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. You see, Michael continued, what you failed to understand is that my wife isn't my plus one. She's not some arm candy or social climber trying to infiltrate your precious event. She's Sarah Mitchell, founder of the Mitchell Foundation for Educational Excellence, which has provided scholarships to over 2,000 underprivileged students in the past 5 years alone. He pocketed his phone and stepped closer to Victoria, his presence somehow filling the entire space despite his conversational tone. She's also the woman who convinced me to donate $50 million to various educational initiatives last year, instead of buying a third yacht. But more importantly to tonight's festivities, she's the wife of the man who owns 47% of the company that's hosting this event. The silence that followed was so complete that the soft jazz music from the ballroom seemed suddenly loud. Victoria's face had moved beyond pale into a sickly gray territory. The security guard looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. 47%, Michael repeated, savoring each word. Which makes me not just an honored guest, but the majority shareholder of Henderson Events Management, the company that bears your family name, Victoria. Victoria's knees actually wobbled. Mr. Mitchell, I had no idea about your investment in our company. If you had known, you would have treated my wife with respect, Michael finished. But here's the thing, Victoria. The fact that you only show respect to people you think can help or hurt you professionally tells me everything I need to know about your character. He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the marble atrium. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my wife, Sarah Mitchell. She has more class in her little finger than most people manage in a lifetime. She chose to dress modestly tonight because she believes in substance over flash. She took a taxi instead of the limousine I offered because she thought it was wasteful. And she's been supporting children's education with more passion and effectiveness than most corporate foundations ever achieve. Spontaneous applause began somewhere in the crowd and spread like wildfire. Several prominent business people stepped forward to introduce themselves to Sarah, their expressions sheepish but genuinely admiring. Michael turned back to Victoria, who was now visibly trembling. As the majority shareholder of your company, I have some immediate concerns about tonight's guest relations protocols. We'll be having a very detailed conversation about that tomorrow morning. He offered his arm to Sarah with old-fashioned gallantry. Shall we go in, darling? I believe they're about to announce the evening's honorees. As Michael and Sarah moved toward the ballroom entrance, Victoria scrambled to follow, her high heels clicking desperately against the marble floor. Mr. Mitchell, please, let me explain, she called out, her professional demeanor completely abandoned. There was clearly a communication breakdown in our office. I never intended any disrespect toward Mrs. Mitchell. Michael paused and turned back, his expression thoughtful. A communication breakdown? Is that what we're calling deliberate discrimination now? The crowd that had witnessed the confrontation was now flowing into the ballroom, but their conversations were entirely focused on what they'd just seen. Word was spreading through the event like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know about the dramatic scene at the registration desk. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah spoke for the first time since Michael's arrival, her voice carrying a quiet dignity that made everyone lean in to listen. I don't need an apology from you. Your actions tonight revealed exactly who you are. But I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you decide someone doesn't belong somewhere based on their appearance. Victoria's eyes filled with tears of humiliation and fear. As the majority shareholder, Michael had the power to end her career with a single decision. Mrs. Mitchell, I am so deeply sorry. I made a terrible mistake in judgment. You made several terrible mistakes, Michael interjected. You assumed my wife wasn't important because she didn't dress to impress you. You implied she might have forged her invitation. You suggested she was some kind of social climber, and worst of all, you did it all publicly, in front of people who will remember this for years to come. A prominent venture capitalist who'd been observing the scene approached them. Michael, I've been trying to reach you about the Portland deal. And Mrs. Mitchell, I've heard incredible things about your foundation's work. Perhaps we could discuss a potential partnership. More business leaders began gravitating toward the couple, clearly eager to distance themselves from Victoria's side of the evening's drama. The social calculations were swift and brutal. Everyone could see which way the power wind was blowing. Victoria stood alone near the registration desk, abandoned by the staff members who had scattered like leaves in a storm. The security guard had quietly disappeared altogether, no doubt hoping to avoid any association with the incident. "Mr. Mitchell?" Victoria made one last desperate attempt. "Surely we can work this out professionally. My family has been in the events business for 3 generations. And that tradition ends tonight," Michael replied matter-of-factly. "By tomorrow morning, Henderson Events Management will be under new leadership. I suggest you start updating your resume." He guided Sarah toward the ballroom, where the sounds of elegant conversation and orchestral music promised a much more pleasant evening. Inside the ballroom, the evening transformed completely. Word of the confrontation had spread through the crowd faster than champagne bubbles rising in crystal flutes, and everywhere Michael and Sarah went, they were greeted with newfound respect and curiosity. "The irony," Sarah murmured to her husband as they stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, "is that I actually prefer being underestimated. It makes people's true characters so much clearer." Michael smiled, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "That's why I fell in love with you. Most people in our position use their wealth as armor. You use yours as a tool for good, and you never let it change who you are." The evening's keynote speaker took the stage, beginning his presentation about innovation in technology and venture capital. Michael's firm was recognized with a prestigious award for their contributions to educational technology startups, and he graciously accepted the honor while ensuring Sarah was acknowledged as the inspiration behind many of their philanthropic investments. During the networking portion of the evening, several attendees approached Sarah specifically, having researched her foundation work after witnessing the earlier scene. A prominent tech CEO expressed interest in funding educational programs, while a group of female executives invited her to join their monthly philanthropic circle. "You know what's remarkable?" commented Margaret Williams, CEO of a major financial services firm, as she chatted with Sarah near the dessert table. "In 15 years of attending these events, I've never seen someone handle public humiliation with such grace. You maintained your dignity when others would have either retreated or lashed out." Sarah glanced across the room, where Victoria was conspicuously absent, having left shortly after the initial confrontation. "Dignity isn't something you lose unless you choose to give it away." She tried to take mine, but that was never really in her power. As the evening wound down, Michael and Sarah made their way toward the exit, declining offers of after-party invitations in favor of quiet time together. They had accomplished more than networking. They had reminded an entire room of influential people that respect should be earned through character, not commanded through status. In the elevator descending from the 42nd floor, Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Thank you for having my back tonight." "Always," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Though I have to say, you handled that situation perfectly even before I arrived. You never let her make you feel small." "Because I know who I am," Sarah said simply. "And after 8 years of marriage to you, I've learned that true power isn't about making others feel inferior. It's about lifting them up." The elevator doors opened onto the busy Manhattan street, where their car waited to take them home. This story reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never depend on designer labels or social status. Sarah's quiet dignity and Michael's protective loyalty show us that true class comes from character, not bank accounts. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you handled it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us to treat everyone with kindness and respect. Let us know where you're watching from, and remember, you never know who might be standing quietly beside you